Hi, welcome everyone. Uh, Topic for today would be corneal cross-linking. In the coming few minutes, I'll try to cover various aspects and the recent updates in corneal cross-linking. I have nothing to disclose financially. So in this talk, I would briefly cover the background of cross-linking. How is cross-linking useful in progressive keratoconus? What is its role in infections? What is its role in keratoplasty and refractive surgery? So cross-linking is an enzymatic process where there is an increase in the molecular bonds, which in turns increases the mechanical strength of the corneal tissue. So you can use several inducers to get this: aldehydes, chemical fixatives, or even photosensitizing radiation. And from the groundbreaking work that Professor Theo Seiler and team have done was UV radiation and riboflavin is the most effective combination for cross-linking in human cornea. So when do you perform cross-linking in case of a keratoconus? So it is important to document progression because cross-linking is indicated for progressive keratoconus. So how do you document progression in keratoconus? These are the indications that you have to look for in 6 months follow-up. One, that is an increase in the maximum K value by 1 diopter, or decrease in the corneal thickness or pachymetry value by 30 microns, or increase in the topographical or manifest astigmatism by 1 diopter. And in order to perform cross-linking, you require a minimal corneal thickness of 400 microns. You can, however, do it to 380 microns thin cornea also if you have access to a hypotonic riboflavin. So there are certain absolute contraindications where it is better to avoid cross-linking. Those are prior herpetic infection, apical scarring, because you know the UV rays will not penetrate. And in case of herpetic infection, you will cause the reactivation of virus. And cases with epithelial wound healing also, it's better to avoid. Pregnancy, though it is not a direct contraindication, during pregnancy, there can be hormonal changes that can lead to the change of K values and also the other parameters in the corneal indices. So it's better to avoid during pregnancy. Active VKC and dry eyes are relative contraindications for performing this procedure. So why is it important to document progression? It is important because not all keratoconuses progress. If you see this case where we have documented it almost 8 months apart, the K1, K2 values and the pachymetry are more or less stable. So these cases, especially a 20-year-old female, it's less likely that it's going to be progressive. So in such cases, you can avoid cross-linking. So progression can be denied. I mean, progression need not always be documented in certain situations. One is children and teenage patients. When you know they have presented to you early in their life with keratoconus, and you know that they're going to progress, in such cases, you need not wait to document progression. And also in cases where you like to see borderline pachymetry, like 390, 380, you don't want to wait for 6 months and let it go down to 370 where they become ineligible for a cross-linking procedure altogether. So this is where we need not document progression. Children, teenage patients, and borderline pachymetry patients. So this is a typical cross-linking worksheet, which will have all the demographical data of the patient, along with what kind of contact lens he has been using, what is the previous scan, ocular history of whatever risk factors we have discussed, history of diabetes or pregnancy, contact lens usage, type, duration, when did he discontinue, because you want to discontinue contact lens at least for 2 weeks before you take your topography and pachymetry values. You do a proper ocular examination, signs of progression. If it is yes, you go ahead. If it is no, you wait. And if it is too low, you have to, you can tell you don't want to see for signs of progression. And usually it is done under topical anesthesia. And depending upon the pachy value, you go for the isotonic, hypotonic, or you defer the procedure altogether. So preoperative investigation is pretty simple because most of the cases we do cross-linking under topical anesthesia. If it is only children whom you think will be uncooperative, you need to take them under general anesthesia. For general anesthesia, you do all the investigations as per the anesthetist. So coming to the other investigations, refraction with contact lens off for 2 weeks, best corrected visual acuity, subjective and cycloplegic refraction, manual keratometry and ultrasonic pachymetry, and of course your pentacam, Sirius or OBSCAN reports. So one minor variation that we have done to this technique is, instead of doing the entire Dresden protocol, that is 1 hour, half an hour, you just instill the drops, half an hour, you shine the UV light, and then instill the drops. So the first half an hour, we have shifted it out of the OT into the ward or OPD. So what we have done here is, under the slit lamp, you can gently debride the epithelium, as you can see here, and then inject these drops into a empty artificial tears bottle and instill these drops for half an hour in the OPD or ward itself. So in this way, the patient is more comfortable. He need not lie down for 1 hour or half an hour. Once the drops are put in for every 2 minutes, he can close his eyes and relax. And the advantage of doing this procedure is, before you take him to the OT, you can actually see for the AC flare in the slit lamp and then shift him to the OT. So in that way, only the patient will be subjected to 30 minutes of procedure in the OT. And your OT also will be left free to do other procedures, which otherwise will be blocked for 1 hour because of this procedure. So this is a small video, and the wavelength we use for the UV light is 370 nanometers. The radiance is 3 milliwatts, and the distance is 5 centimeters from the corneal apex. The dosage is 5.4 joules, and the duration is 30 minutes. So before every procedure, make sure you calibrate the machine. When you're calibrating, keep it in the large aperture. The machine we are using here is the UVX, the initial thing got by Dr. Saylor. And so these are the simple instruments that you need. So you can gently debride the epithelium as shown in the video. Make sure that the cone is definitely in the debrided part. You can use alcohol, or you can just instill proparacaine multiple times so that the epithelium sloughens off and it's easy to remove the epithelium with a simple 50 number blade. Then with the help of this sponge material that comes with our suturing material, you create a well with an 8.5 punch. This acts as a well as a limbal shield. So this 20 minutes, what I'm showing you here, actually we do it in the OPD now. Now after half an hour, 5 centimeters from the beam aperture, put it into M because most of our eyes are medium size, put the UV glow on, and then start the UV rays. Once you start the UV rays, the ambient lighting should be put off in the room, and every 2 minutes, keep the cornea wet with riboflavin. Automatically after half an hour, the light is switched off, and then you nicely wash the stroma with saline and place a BCL. There you can see the haze that is apparent after the procedure, which will slowly wean off in the next 2 weeks. So thin corneas, the option is until 380, you can use hypotonic riboflavin, or you can also do a contact lens assisted cross-linking. Make sure that the contact lens is not UV blocking. And if you have access to smile lenticules, you can place it over the cornea and do a lenticule assisted cross-linking. And make sure in the case of thin corneas that you have intraoperative Pachy in hand so that you can keep measuring it. And alternative to this, if the cornea is less than 380, there is a new procedure that we are trying to do, that is the Bowman-Layer stromal transplant. So post-operative care is quite simple. You just put the patient on antibiotic and steroids. Antibiotics are tapered in 2 weeks, and low-dose steroids like loteprednol are tapered over the 4 weeks, and BCL is usually removed on the 3rd or 4th day after the epithelium is completely healed. And you review for 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months, and then 1 year. Contact lens can be reused at 3 months post C3R, and it's better to repeat your pentacams at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year interval to document progression or also even stabilization. In some cases, the K values also come down, leading to reduced astigmatism in most of the cases. In borderline pachymetry cases, it's better to look for specular also to make sure that you have not damaged the endothelium. So the usual complications can be delayed epithelial healing. That should not be a problem. Corneal infiltrates. In our experience, we did not see much of infiltrates, but to our knowledge, whatever infiltrates are usually because of the commensals that are there in the lids, and you can easily treat them with topical antibiotics and they respond well. Stromal haze usually stays for a few weeks, but in some cases it may persist for longer time. In such cases, you need to continue steroids for a longer time. But the haze is not at all visually disturbing. It's only when you see in the slit lamp, you find the haze. Otherwise, the patient usually does not complain of any visual symptoms. And one more complication could be a treatment failure where you have done the cross-linking, but still the keratoconus can progress. So our take on accelerated cross-linking is the hypothesis is when the final energy like 5.4 joule is delivered instead of the 30-minute exposure, why not do the 3 minutes one? I just want to do a small anecdote here. So what we all have to remember is just because the final energy is the same, the effect of cross-linking may not be the same. So here I have a funny anecdote from Mr. Buffet. No matter how great or talented, some things just take time. You cannot produce a baby in 1 month by making 9 women pregnant. I think that answers that question. So accelerated cross-linking, as I was telling you, it does not translate to same effectiveness even though the same energy is achieved. So when the irradiance, for example, is increased to 18 milliwatts, there is definitely a reduced effect on corneal stiffening. And when the irradiance is 30 milliwatts, that's almost what you're doing in a 3-minute protocol, the effect is almost negligible and it is as good as not doing cross-linking. So the maximum you can increase it is the 9 milliwatt, that is the 10 minutes protocol, but nothing beyond it. But however, we still prefer the old golden thing that we have. That's the 3 milliwatt for 30 minutes. That's the most effective. And when we are having consistent results, we don't want to try anything else. Coming to transepithelial CXL also, it's definitely not as effective as the classical or epithelial off CXL. However, you can use a innovative technique called as the window absorption. Instead of removing the entire cornea, you can just remove 4 to 5 millimeters. Especially this can be useful in thin corneas. But however, most of the studies still tell that it is not as efficient as the regular cross-linking. It must, and I am sorry, it will have some role probably in PAC-CXL or for cross-linking in infections. So that's something new that what we have now in 2020 is the cross-linking at slit lamp. So this is like democratizing the cross-linking procedure. So you can do the cross-linking even at your OPDs, and you can carry this very portable machine wherever you want. And but one thing, what I doubt is whether the patient will be able to cooperate even for a 10-minute procedure with the slit lamp in that position without moving her eyes and all, because you need stability, and once that rays have to fall into the desired area. Probably it will have more role in case of PAC CXL where you want to do it like an OPD procedure. But from the patient's perspective, we need to see how the patients are going to accept cross-linking while they're sitting for 10 minutes without moving their eyes. That is one thing we need to see. So one more interesting insight I want to share with you is from the recent ASCRS virtual conference in Boston. We have Van Nugering from Mason Eye Institute, Columbia, who presented a very interesting poster where he gave the patients 400 to 500 milligrams of dietary riboflavin. It was in a small subset of 5 patients with 10 eyes, and they were exposed to 15 minutes of sun rays every day for 6 months. And according to them, vision improved and K-value stabilized. So I know it's a very early stages and very small numbers, but something very interesting. That's why I included it in my presentations. So coming to infections, what is the role of cross-linking in infections? The antimicrobial effect of a similar photochemical reaction using riboflavin and UVA has already been successfully exploited in the field of transfusion medicine. So getting inspired by this, even in ophthalmology, we tried and we found out that this combination directly damages the bacterial DNA, and it also increases the resistance to enzymatic degradation, and it also prevents melting, and it also helps in restoring the normal architecture of the cornea. And because of all these ultrastructural changes, there was an increased interest to try out cross-linking in this. So there were several studies that were done previously, and all of them supported that cross-linking does has a beneficial role in all kinds of microbial keratitis. And the only thing they told was, as expected, to avoid in viral. And but when I was doing my fellowship at Aravind, ours was the first study in the world, first randomized control trial, where we were looking specifically for its role in fungal keratitis. And we were the first to do this study because, fungal keratitis is a very enigmatic disease. It doesn't heal well, especially when it gets deeper. So we wanted to assess the efficacy of cross-linking as an adjuvant to appropriate antifungal therapy in non-resolving deep stromal fungal keratitis. And what we found out was it did not have any better outcomes, but in the contrary, the group that cross-linking was there was significant increase in the perforation rate. So when we went back and again searched at other literature, probably because of this cross-linking, the antifungal molecules were not able to penetrate deeper, and that could be one of the reasons for increased perforation in the cross-linking group. So our experience in bacterial keratitis was different. So we had better outcomes in bacterial keratitis. These are all the several cases with follow-ups that you can see. And our experience again with bacterial keratitis in K-Pro melt was also positive, where you can see this melt for almost 6 clock hours. So with appropriate antibiotics like fortified cefazolin, moxifloxacin, and along with one sitting of cross-linking, 2 weeks post-intervention, it completely healed. And luckily, the patient need not undergo any invasive procedure, and we could manage it with cross-linking and antibiotics. Coming to the role of cross-linking in keratoplasty, we had one case of lattice dystrophy which had recurrence. So what we did in that case was we transplanted the cross-linked cornea, and we followed this case up for 3 years now, and we did not find any recurrence in that case. And I think one more interesting area is the role of cross-linking of corneal tissues for therapeutic graft. I think Jeevan Tityal sir from All India Institute has done a very wonderful work in this area, and they found that it definitely has a beneficial effect in prevention of reinfections, especially when you have larger grafts, limbal involvement, probably the cross-linking grafts will be more compact and will not allow the recurrence of the infection into these grafts. So I think they definitely will have a role in the future for difficult organisms like Pythium, fungus, and it will also have a very good role for newer lamellar procedures like Bowman's layer transplantation as an adjuvant therapy also. So we were just doing Bowman's layer transplantation as a special technique that we do for keratoconus that is not suitable for cross-linking and too early for a corneal graft. So we do those for this procedure for those cases. If you're more interested to know about this procedure, you can check in my channel that has a video about the Bowman's layer transplantation and its procedure in detail. So coming to refractive surgery, I think previously they were doing it for cases with borderline pachymetry or suspected form first keratoconus. But Theo Seiler himself has told that you should never combine cross-linking with a refractive surgery because the outcomes are unpredictable. So it is better to avoid as far as possible. And now I think nobody is combining it. Mostly what most of the people are preferring now is a topo-guided PRK for these kind of corneas. So that ends my talk for today. And I was fortunate enough to meet the father of cross-linking, Professor Theo Seiler himself in the CXL experts meet in those good old days when we were all traveling freely through this world. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you.